Okay guys, I figured out the reference I'm going to use for my sketch, so we're going to get started. This sketch is going to be just one session, and one session to you might mean different than what it is for me, but I tend to do like a few hours. The whole point of this is to be quick, it's to be thorough, be accurate, but at the same time, don't get hung up on details. Try to rely on larger tools, and this is probably my favorite tool to use. I've had this for years. It's just a paint scraper that you get at Home Depot. This is what artists don't usually use, but they are extremely handy. You want to get something with that it's got a little bit of a flex to it. There's some that are very thick metal. I don't like those as much, but you know, it's all based on what you like. And also try to rely on your fingers, of course. And one of the things I would recommend is get clay that's low fire with some grog. I know that some artists prefer no grog, but it helps the firing process to have little bits of grog in there. And we're going to put a sheet of clay down, just like an inch, and then we're going to build our sculpture on top of that. So let's get started. I have the clay right here. Use just whatever is available. It's around here. I get it from Creative Clay in Alexandria, Virginia, and I believe it's called Low Fire Grog, and it's red clay. I also have the option of getting white clay or gray clay, but it's all about the same thing, and I prefer the redness. Now, Canova had like this really great quote that I have been kind of echoing in my mind, is that he said, terracotta is the life, plaster is the death, and marble is the resurrection. I thought that was a great quote by him. So we're going to have his ideas of sculpture in our heads, and we're going to try to create something in his style, but yet we're going to have our own flair, we're going to have our own poses. Canova was really an amazing sculptor, and unfortunately there's not a lot of Canovas around the United States. And I've seen a few. The interesting thing about Canova is that his clays were what he touched. Those are the more important ones because they were the ideas, the sketches, and then he translated into larger sketches, and then they took measurements into a marble and pointed it. But the people, his students, his assistants were the ones doing all the marbles. Like they did all the work. There's some artists in the past, like Bernini. Bernini did his own carving. That guy focused a lot on carving. And Canova was more of what you would consider just a modeler. He modeled clay. Of course, he could also carve marble. And he basically supervised these large marbles. And he had a Hellenistic sort of face. He really like looked into the inspiration of the Greeks. You know, that's the height of sculpture, is really like the Greek, the Hellenistic period, and then everything else is really downhill until the Renaissance with Michelangelo. And ever since, it's been a down slope of sculpture. You do have a little tick in French sculpture in the 19th century, and also American sculpture in the 19th century. But even then, it doesn't compare to the pinnacle of art in Greece. Like that really is what most sculptors would consider the best of all sculpture. So with that in mind, let's get started. By the way, even these bags I will reuse for my sculpture. There we go. So you actually kind of smell a little mildew in here. What I would do is I would just take this and cut it, because this plastic bag, for example, is a little bit too thin. This plastic is a little bit thicker, so it works a little bit nicer. So we have just a lump of clay. I always start with a base. Don't start by just throwing clay on a base and then afterwards put something. I always like to get something like this, and we are going to be doing a reclining pose, so that's going to be nice. I'm just going to cut this to make it easier. Put this aside, and then I'm looking at, let me see if I can, and then when I look at my model, I'm like orienting it the way I want. So if I do it like this, I'm looking at it right here. I'm going to have one of the legs kind of go over the base. So even when you're doing this, you have to pay attention to all the things on here. So this is too thick, but that's okay because I'm going to take just my body, just kind of push it down. I'll put my coffee over here so it doesn't spill. And I'm just going to be pushing it down like this. This does two things. It makes everything wide, but also this clay could have some bubbles in here, so you're putting in a lot of pressure and getting the clay nice and level. All of this just for a base. So I'm going to just extend this all the way. That's why I decided to cut this into another section. If your clay is a little bit on the hard side, just add some water, as mine is. And even though this is kind of like, now it's like oily, you know, it's like too wet, don't recommend touching it like this. This is when your hands become very dirty. As a sculptor, you don't want to work with the clay where it's too wet. But if you just wait a few seconds, this is going to disappear. But what you can do is just take another piece of clay like this and just start adding it to the base. Make sure you push it down, and I'm going to roll this, and now I'm just going to put a little bit here. So remember, this is going to be a sketch. This is not like a finished piece that I'm going to be spending a lot of time on, and it's just going to be a one session thing. Now this is the reason I like these paint scrapers. Just by doing this, you can put a lot in there, and it's not about making it smooth, but it's about pushing it down, and this blends the clay all together. A lot of times you can create like these cracks and fissures, usually when you add new clay to old clay. So this really works out. And I have another chunk here. What I'm going to do, put it aside, and we're just going to create a nice level 1-inch base. That's exactly what you want. You don't want it to be too big. You just want enough to just develop your clay figure. This is like an aluminum foil. You can actually make it out of a soda can, and you just kind of do this, and it's got two sides to it. One side is the serrated side and one is the smooth side. I like the serrated side, and I'll just create a nice level ground. Like, you want to do this quickly so you don't spend a lot of time on it. Sometimes it actually takes longer to do. So this part is actually thicker than this, so I'm going to add more clay and create a nice level. Like that. And this plastic bag is not on there very well, so it kind of moves, but that's okay because after this, you're not going to be putting in as much power as you're working on the base. So I'm just kind of holding things, just kind of doing this. If one part is too thick, see this is like about 1 inch, this is a little bit less, you can just remove a little bit from the parts that are too thick. The one thing I do recommend is taking care of the edges. For example, right here, on this side, this is why you have a paint scraper. You can just kind of do this. Don't cut the bag. And just kind of remove it. Put it aside. Now you're going to go to this side, do the exact same thing. And that's pretty much it. So we have finished the base. Let's get started on building the figure on here. One thing I recommend you guys use is a sprayer like this, and this is just water, and spray your base. Just let it dry. So because I've used this serrated edge, it creates these grooves, and what happens is that when you add clay on top of that, it acts as a vacuum and it pushes it down, seals it really well. So I'm just going to build on this wetness after it just dries, just a little bit. You don't want to be too wet. But my clay in my bag was just a little bit too dry anyway, so I'm trying to get the clay to become a little bit better. Try to figure out where the model is. So there's a line down here, right about here. She's got her left thigh, and then it comes this way, and then the leg, this thigh is actually going to stick outside of the base. And it kind of goes like that. She's a plus size model. So right here is the shoulder, and then you have the head right here. So all of this is going to be the model, and then we have our arm, and that's how you would sketch it. Then all you do is take clay. Hopefully you have better clay that's new, it cuts down on the work, and I'm just going to start adding where I think the model is going to be. So that's the right leg, and that's actually the thigh, and this is the leg. Actually the thigh, the knee should be a little bit further down, and then the thigh, the left thigh is going to be here. You have to make sure you push down the clay quite a bit to meet the base. You know, you don't want it to have two types of drying because that's what creates a lot of the cracks. So now I'll just keep adding, and I roll the clay in my hands like this. If it's used clay, you're going to have to work it, knead it. That is, work it, make sure there's no pockets of air. When you buy clay from a commercial shop, it's already kneaded, so you don't have to do that. So I'm actually kind of pushing in the clay because I want to build out. This might not seem like much, but this is the torso. And the torso, the rib cage, for example, she's actually kind of looking this way. So you can do that with your clay and then just build up this section. And don't worry about making mistakes. You know, these sketches, they're all about being fast, loose, and you know, I really enjoy looking at the sketches, sometimes much more than the marbles that Canova did. And I'm going to have some of the Canova's terracottas up just for inspiration. So here's the hips. This part you're going to have to bring in quite a bit. And you see how I'm just kind of building it slowly. Ideally, you get a big chunk of clay and you just kind of lay it down. That way you don't have to build it up. And yes, you do need to completely hollow it out. Sometimes if the figure is not too big, you can kind of get away with not hollowing it, but it's always good practice, and you get some of the old clay back, so you can keep sculpting. Here's the left thigh. So you want to rely much more on larger tools if you're going to use larger tools. But you know, one of the canova things that I've seen him do is he relied a lot on his fingers. And one of the cool things about this exhibit was you got to see his fingerprints on the sculptures, on the terracottas. So I just need to build this thing up. Like, we don't have that much time to build this. So the whole point of this is that I'm just going to build this out as quickly as I can. And hopefully you guys can see what I'm seeing. My tripod is a little bit on the shorter side, but I think you still get a decent view of this. So I want to get that thigh and the direction of the thigh. And also keep in mind that you want to be able to look at all vantage points. And when you have a model that poses for you, you're basically asking the model to move every 15 minutes or so. So that's kind of the standard. You want to move a lot faster in the beginning. And I do like doing these sketches. It's just like lately I haven't had that much, because the problem is, like, I'll do these sketches and then I'll put them right into my bag again, because you don't want to keep so many sculptures. If you have like just a small studio, you can easily fill your entire studio with sketches and very few sculptures. So at one point, one of my goals was to work on finished sculptures only, because I had so many sketches that excuse me, it just kind of got in the way. So that's the head, and of course doesn't look like a head yet. Excuse me. So that's the thigh, and now I'm going to take I'm going to roll this, and that is the lower leg. This is a plus size model, so we're going to need quite a bit of clay. Hopefully I can just use the clay that I have. So I do like wooden tools. The thing I'm going to try and do is keep it with just very limited tools. Actually, as an exercise for most artists, you should try and do maybe a sculpture with like just 2 tools and see what you can come up with. You'll be pleasantly surprised. I think one of the things that you see is that an artist begins sculptor or painter, they just go out and buy so many tools. And as most artists I've ever met, you rely on just a few. You don't really use too many. Unless you're doing other types of sculpture, like wood sculpture, and then you need like a lot of tools. So there we go. You're starting to see what I'm sculpting. Reclining pose. She has her head actually facing down. And that's the arm, and then the arm kind of goes that way. So I have my bag of clay here, and I'm going to reach in and get some clay. A lot of times, if the clay, as in my case, it's a little bit on the drier side, because this is all recycled clay from my last sculpture. This is actually was on the inside, so I've been wetting it. By the way, you don't ever want to work on your sculpture with this consistency of clay. Like, you don't want it to be wet. This is more for kneading clay. Just kind of work it like this, And what I like to do, I like to leave it on my larger table, getting ready for adding. So this one's a little bit nicer, nice and elastic. Do that. And if your clay needs just a quick amount of water, you can do that. That's why I have the water bottle always near me. When you're working with a new bag of clay, then you don't have to wet it as much. Only after a while, so I like to do that. So let me show you really quick this technique that works really well. So this clay, if it's too dry, what I do is I take it and I just kind of make a little bit of a indentation in here, and then I take my water bottle, pour it in there. That way it's kind of like it pools up, and I just leave it aside. And what that does is that eventually it kind of works into the clay. You don't have to worry about the water running onto your table. So it's perfect. If the clay is too wet, just work on another part. It gets the clay really in there, creates facets. So this thigh, you see like how it's kind of coming off to the side. But also, we're gonna have to increase the back. It looks way too thin in the back. So this clay is still way too hard. Can't do that. Even harder clay. I'm just going to take this aside. And unfortunately I need to water a lot of this clay. Let me just look at this really quick. Keep down. All right, let's see. Okay, so I think I'm going to move my model. You know, sometimes I get stuck in these places and I can't figure out what to proceed, and then I just have to concentrate. I think it's hard for me to talk and sculpt as well, but I'm getting used to it. And get rid of all of that. So you should constantly be moving your model around. You don't want to be stuck looking at, you know, any particular section. And you know, I've done plenty of live model sessions, and I used to do this sculpture marathon in Rockville. It was like, what is that, 12 hours of sculpting from a model? That was a little bit nutty. I don't think you can really concentrate when you're doing 12 hours, but some people like the novelty of it. So what I might do in the upcoming videos, and mainly I think for my Patreon, I'm probably going to be doing a whole lot more live modeling this coming year. Even though it's expensive, it's like, I'm kind of like stuck, you know, I'm not really improving, unfortunately. I'm always like struggling for details or putting in details I don't particularly like. So right now, I'm like looking at the model and I'm looking at her back. So as her back is turning, because like it's really an interesting pose, is that there's so much more flatness to the back. You know, it's not flat, but she is going from her hips almost being at this angle, and as she's turning her head, everything's kind of coming down. So what I want to do is create that. You know, right now it's just, the pose is not right. I'm just adding all the possible structures and I'm struggling with the clay. That's why you don't want to add any struggle to your sculpture. All right, so now, yeah, I'm not sure if you guys can hear me either, but unfortunately, the mic is on the camera and not on the computer. Actually, let me see if that... Okay. At this point, I'm going to add the shoulders. And then what I like to do is keep things nice and straight. I'm looking at the deltoids here. The deltoid, the biceps on her are kind of all included into one. She's very big. So I just want to add the direction that is. I don't want to add too much detail, just the direction. That's what I saw in Canova's sculptures. Because, you know, I think we all get carried away with details, including me. And the less details you do, probably better. Or just enough to convey the message. So that's the arm, and it's a lot closer to the proportion of the body. So now you see I'm using this wooden tool, and the wooden tool is letting me create the direction of the body, the arms. That way I don't have to struggle with like anything else. And I'm doing this kind of rounded look just to get into the middle, or into this part where I can't really get in there. And now I am going to just add a little bit more. Sometimes it helps to have, you start in one section and you just move slowly. So some people like to start, when you do a portrait, they start at the eye and they kind of expand out. And some sculptors, they do that with like arms and stuff and just kind of expand out. I think it helps to have one feature that you think you can take references from. But generally, I think that's a bad practice, because if you have a really good section, the eye, the head, you're forced not to really make modifications, even if it's wrong. So I think the mistakes you could add are enhanced if you just refuse to do that. Now I'm using this kind of backside of the wooden tool. It's got this rounded edge, and the reason I like it is that right here in the deltoid, her left arm, I could take the scooping tool and create that sort of shape. By the way, this is like what's called modeling and sculpting. So you're creating the sketch, creating the art. And let's see what I got here. Her head, if you can't tell yet, is buried. You actually don't see a lot of her head. So a lot of it is like her hair. It's really an interesting pose. Some sculptors, they don't like doing heads because, you know, portraits are very difficult. Even a generic person is very difficult. That's why you should do them. And they like to hide the head. Watch some sculptors online and you'll see them trying to hide like their heads. Okay, so I'm going to move my model. Watch the beginning of the video and you'll see what I'm using for reference. So I'm going to look at the left side here. I'm going to zoom in actually into the body because I really have to study that torso. And so if that's her arm, and try to be a little bit more generic with your tools. Like don't get very complex tools. So now I'm going to take my scraper, just kind of move it down like this. And look at the arm. For example, if I'm really studying this arm, I'm like trying to figure out what's the left, the underneath, and the front. And I'm going to take this tool and just rely on it. And I think the nice thing about limiting your tool choices, it creates something that it almost seems like you couldn't do. I think the problem is like we have so many choices. We have so many choices in all sorts of things. And with more choices, it doesn't really create a greater range. It just kind of creates a big lump of messiness, unfortunately. So this is where the breast is. And I'm going to take, it might actually be too big for this, but I'm still going to use this. So right there, that's where the breast is. Kind of hiding, as breasts tend to do. And I'm going to take, oh man, this clay is not good. And I'm going to take a little bit more to the breast, right there. Now I'm going to take my trusty wood tool, just kind of, what I do is like, if I need to blend it, I just kind of twist it like this. This blends it together. You know, I'm still keeping in mind how the shape of the breast should be, for example. So where any body part hits the ground or the platform, you have to keep that in mind because you don't want to create the body and it just kind of droops into the figure. One thing I've seen beginner students do is that they'll just take, let me wet this a bit. They'll just take the body and right here where it meets the base, they'll just leave it like that. But in reality, there's a little pocket here and the pocket varies throughout. So some parts, the fat, the body, the muscle could be touching the platform a whole lot closer to the platform. Some are, they go in. You really have to pay attention to that. Often I find that people don't really pay attention to that. But actually, those are the things I really like about sculptures, like the little things. So let's see this. I mean, you're starting to see a figure. And actually, when I look at it, I'm starting to think, oh man, that's just too thin. She's too thin. So I'm going to add. That's the thing, when you're a thin person looking at a body like this, it's like, oh, what? I have to keep adding clay? By now, I should have already finished. And you see, I don't know if you can tell, but I jump from one thing to the other, just going back and forth. So here is kind of like an important landmark. That, you know, she's got so much fat. So right here, that's really like the hips and the rolls of fat are kind of like coming up like that. So I'm just going to take my wooden tool and start blending this into the thigh. And so this part is going to go in. So now I'm going to take this, take my scraper. Oh, this clay is just so dry. See if I can wet this a little bit more because it's really unworkable. Okay. Right here, there's a line, another line. That's where the rib cage would be, right there. This is where the hips and the thigh. Her thighs are much bigger, so I'm going to have to add quite a bit of clay on this section, but I don't want to add it too much. I'm actually not sure if I have enough for this pose. Jeez. All right, work the clay just a bit. I'm going to add clay on the other thigh because I've been working on this side. You can see it's starting to look human. Now I'm going to add clay on this side. This leg, kind of fill it in. I don't know. This whole Patreon thing has been difficult. It's like a bit putting things up. I wish it was like structured a little bit nicer. That way I could put these things up, put references up for you guys. So every sculpture that I use reference, even with the live model, I think I'm going to just put it up for free. I guess it's not free if you pay. So right here, I'm going to start building the back. So I put like a roll where I want the clay to be, and then I just kind of push it down. Remember, the goal of this is to finish this in one session. And I don't really care if it's finished. It just, this is an exercise. And I think we should all do more of these. I think what I've seen and what I've done is we want to do finished works, and we often neglect the sketches. The Canova show was kind of like an eye-opener for me. All right, so right here, I'm going to add a little bit more fat here on the back. This is the erector spinae. You would be able to see it if she was just a little bit thinner, but you can still see the fat pushing out. So right here is a very interesting part. You can't really see it too much, but on video, it's a line that way and then extends to the back. It's really neat because most people do not have this, but because she is so big, there's fat on the bottom with the pelvis, and instead of gently curving towards the rib cage, there's like an abrupt end, which looks cool. It looks really cool. Probably not healthy, but still awesome. So right here, I want to make some details. So we're looking at the back, and we need to divide this. Also, keep that in mind. When you put this line down, you need to figure out where the thighs are going to go. And she's so big still that we're going to have so much more clay. Getting kind of worried that I don't have enough clay. So this part is actually going to be coming out. She is tilting her hips just slightly. You can do this, just kind of push it, but it's probably best to add a little bit of clay and make it thicker. So right here, I'm going to take my wooden tool I'm just going to do this. And just going to push this down. Yeah, that division right there. So that also means that there's rolls of fat here that are a little bit less round as this section. And this part, yeah, like this part just comes down quite a bit. I'm gonna have to push this down, push the arm. It means that all of this, just kind of push it, flatten it. This part is going to be coming up. So her trapezius are actually quite large here. And I'm going to try and flatten this out a bit. Right there, make a cut. You know, like I've also heard people like, yeah, you know, you should be standing up when sculpting. And a lot of people do that. But, you know, you don't need it. Some parts of sculpture, you definitely need to be standing. Ah, man, this clay. This clay is such a boner. It's just so dry. Yeah, if you guys can help it, use new clay. Unlike me. Okay. Right there. Right there. Okay. Now, this thigh, direction of the thigh, like that. And now, this part, let's bring in the thigh. You see, just by doing that, it starts to look better. Just by doing this, shaping this thigh, and the clay is easy enough to kind of move around. So right here, this thigh needs to be so much bigger. And I'm going to add more clay right here. Sorry, I'm getting in the way of the light. I prefer the light at dark just because it's much more contrasty, but the color of clay right about now with the natural light is very, very beautiful. So I'm going to take some of this clay from the base here because I need it. And I'm going to add a roll of fat here. That's right about the waist. And by the way, you can actually tell the difference of this clay and the other type just because of the grog. You actually, if you could see it, maybe I'll zoom in one day, you see the little bits of grog in the clay. So I decided to fast forward through this process. As you can see, I'm adding details. The one thing that I do suggest on these quick sketches, try to limit yourself. Give yourself a goal. For example, my goal was to finish this entire sculpture in a session. For me, a session is a day or so. I sculpted for about 5 hours or so, and I came back the next day and I did some more details. And I like this process. I do like the quick sketches that you would find on a lot of the working sculptures for marbles, such as the terracottas that I saw from Canova. So I'm adding all the details, and one thing that I gave myself a challenge was to limit the amount of tools I could use in the sculpture. I did put already the reference for this particular sculpture on my Patreon. You can go there if you want to download the full size reference. But for right now, I am just finishing this thing up, and I will be firing it in the future. So I am probably going to take a little hiatus from the channel because I'll be going to Europe for a bit. If you guys are anywhere in Europe, message me and maybe we can do like a sculpture class together. That would be really fun. And I will be going to Portugal, so keep that in mind. I'll probably travel a little bit to Spain as well. So I am going to be putting in that left and right foot. If you notice, there is no feet on there. I just wanted to indicate things really quick. I'm using that aluminum foil tool. It's really cheap and it gets rid of all the imperfections really easy. And I'm trying to keep from using very small detailed tools. I think later on I will use the silicone tools because I need to get into the crevices. And one thing I noticed with the final sculpture is that I got a little bit too detailed even with this. So I have this habit of adding too much detail. When you look at the canova sculptures, they're not as detailed. I think as a sculptor you have to be a little bit looser. Don't get too carried away with doing details because then it looks like one of those sci-fi comic book type of sculptures that you often see on YouTube. There's nothing wrong with that, but when you look at fine art sculpture, it's a lot looser. Even the sculptures that you see from modern masters, they are extremely loose. They're painterly even. Struggling with the clay that I recycled because it was a little bit hard. So you'll see me often setting it down, hollowing it out a bit, working it with my hands and putting water on it. That way it becomes a little bit softer. So I'm using my silicone tools at this point. The silicone tools work really well to get into the crevices. So if I'm doing like little fat folds, those little tools help push the clay a lot easier. And it feels like I'm painting just by pushing the clay around. These silicone tools have been extremely good and they're so cheap. I think I got them on eBay and it comes with like 18. I think the only one I like is the flat. The silicone tools that are flat just give you the most flexibility, I think. There are some that have an angle and that makes it nice to kind of sculpt the line in there. But I think the flat ones, they just create this nice geometric flat shape that I really like. And I go back with my cloth. The cloth is just a shop towel that you would get from any auto body parts store. And I think I got this at Advanced Auto. It comes like in 20 of them. They're really good. After you use them, you just throw them away. You could wash them, but sometimes there's not much of a point. Another goal for me was to create different strokes for the brushes and for the tools. I want to show that in the final product. At this point, I want to add some finishing tools, some finishing marks on there. And you can see I'm just adding little details, but not enough to make it realistic. I just kind of want to create an impressionistic type of sculpture. It still looks classical. It still looks like it could be taken to a higher degree of finish, but I wanted to leave it one step before. And I'm creating a little bit more fullness to the arms and to the body because the underlying structure is just so important to get right. That's pretty much what I have for this figure sketch. Once in a while, I would suggest if you want to get better, do quick sketches. A quick sketch for you might be like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. It doesn't matter, but limit yourself. Give yourself, okay, I'm going to finish this in a day. I'm going to finish this in 2 days. In the sculpture process, you still have to hollow it out, you still have to let it dry, and you still have to let it fire. So it's not like painting that after you finish the paint, it's pretty much done and all you have to do is frame it. But on sculpture, there's a little bit more of a process. But I think I'm probably going to do a lot more of these quick sketches, and it's just a good exercise to do. You know, I've even gone to figure drawing sketches where most of the artists sketch using paper, and I've done clay studies using oil-based clay. I recommend people do that more, and I wish there was more accommodation for artists that want to sculpt. I really appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.